5 or 6 months ago, I came across an article by Stephen Hill, a man I've read and admired for several years. I came across an article entitled, "Why Does the U.S. Still Have So Few Women in Office?" Let me turn this thing off. Sorry about that. Well, if it yells, it'll yell. But that article set me off on a train of thought that's been pretty much continuous since I read it. The subtitle of the article, "At the current rate of progress, it will take nearly 500 years for women to reach fair representation in government." I think that's a quote from someone at Fair Vote. I'm going to read a few short paragraphs from that article to introduce this morning's topic. With Hillary Clinton, and I just read this morning that Elizabeth Warren is going to spend some quality time in Iowa this week, and we know what a trip to Iowa means. But with Hillary Clinton, the early front-runner in the 2016 Democratic primary, the U.S. may join the United Kingdom, Germany, Brazil, and Argentina as democracies that have had a woman as their top leader. And there's several more. Chile and Chile's a good one. I'd agree with that. Yet the alarming reality is that American women are still vastly underrepresented in elected office all across the nation. Remember the Year of the Woman in 1992, just over 20 years ago? At that time, women still hold, that's 22 years, and women still hold less than 20% of congressional seats, despite being a majority of the population. And compared to other nations, the United States is losing ground. America now ranks 98th in the world for percentage of women in its national legislature. That is down from 59th in 1998. That's embarrassing. Just behind Kenya and Indonesia, just ahead, though, of the United Arab Emirates. Only 5 governors are women, including just 1 Democrat. 24 states have never had a female governor. The percentage of women holding statewide and state legislative offices is less than 25%. That's barely higher than in 1993. Locally, only 12 of our 100 largest cities have female mayors. That's our subject, that's our issue for this morning. Now a few words about our speaker, who's as well qualified as anyone I know, or could imagine almost, to address this topic, why women. Mary Hughes is a political strategist and principal at Hughes and Company. She's the architect of Close the Gap, California, a 4-year, 2013 through 2016 campaign to recruit talented, progressive women to run for the California legislature. She's also the architect of the 2012 Project, a national nonpartisan campaign to increase the number of women in Congress and state legislatures. She has advised candidates for president, for Congress, state legislative office, and served as the executive director of the California Democratic Party. Her work has contributed to several historic firsts for women. The first woman to lead her party in Congress, the first woman superintendent of schools of California schools, and the first out lesbian judge elected in the nation. I'm going to rush through some of this and leave out some things that are also important. You can ask Mary about the rest of her credentials. But she's received numerous awards, including being named Woman of the Year by Emerge California 2007, California Women Lead did the same thing in 2013, naming Hughes their Woman of the Year. She is a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law and Mount Holyoke College. She lives just down the street with her husband, Joe. I've had the opportunity to hear Mary on 2 occasions, and I can say to you, be prepared to be informed, be prepared to be challenged,
Yikes.
be prepared to be inspired, be prepared to be motivated to go out and change things. It's an honor to present Mary Hughes.
Good morning, everybody. That just about chased me out of the building. Hard to follow that. I am your neighbor just down the road. I'm grateful for your invitation. I'm happy to be with you. My understanding is we have about 20 minutes for me to share what I've learned over the years, and then we'll have a conversation, which is my favorite part. As Paul said, things in the United States are not as they should be, might be, could be. We hope they will be for women. And it has been a long haul, and I would add just one specific to his statistics, which is there are fewer women in the California legislature today than there were a decade ago. So it's not a question of just going forward and how do we do more, it's a question of not going backward. And that is a huge challenge for all of us. But let me just tell you a few things. And mostly, I'm happy to share in the Q&A with you anything about the current election, either national or state. But I want to talk to you most specifically today about why women don't run for office and why it matters that they do run. So I start from a point of view that I hope you will embrace, which is that men and women are different, that difference has value, and that the value is currently absent from most American institutions, the value that women would add, because we do not currently approach the 1/3 of any leadership of any institution that we must comprise in order to change the culture, direction, agenda of that institution. And that is a serious problem. I would venture to say that the numbers that Paul referenced about how we rank in the world and our dropping status because of the low participation and leadership of women across institutions. So mostly the World Economic Forum looks at education, health, political leadership, and economic opportunity. We rate pretty well on some of those. We rate very poorly on political leadership. We don't rate corporate leadership, but I can tell you that we rank, we are right at about 13%, women are, of corporate leaders. And when you get into the Fortune 500 and you're looking at board membership, you're at about 3%. So this is a serious lack of women's participation in leading institutions across sectors in the United States. If you think things are going well, that might not disturb you. But I think it's hard to think things are going well, and it's really difficult to get into the minutia of solving big problems. Gender balance and gender participation in leadership is one of those things that we have control over, we can make a difference with, and we don't do. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. Why don't we? Why is this so hard in the United States? Why has it been easier in other places? What's wrong with us? Well, first and foremost, I'll just tell you, many studies now have looked at why women don't run for office. And they're not foreign to you. You know these reasons. There are reasons why many good men don't run for office. But women don't run because of the negativity of the current campaigns, the high demand for dollars, and the the complete permeation of money in our politics and campaigns. They don't run because of the invasiveness of the media into the lives of our political leaders. That is especially true for women who have children, especially teenagers. They don't run because many, many talented women, and this is very true of our valley, many talented women say, I do care about homelessness, I do care about literacy, I do care about these immigration issues, but you know what? I think I can have an effect on those right here in my own way. So I'm going to start a nonprofit, or a foundation that supports them, or volunteer my time, or start a social service organization, which I call the DIY, the do-it-yourself woman leader. The problem with that is that while you may do some good in the short term for some people, we have so degraded the power and the good that government can do that people forget that a good piece of legislation in California can affect the lives of 38 million people. And there are only 40 senators in California, and they represent nearly 1 million people, and they have enormous power to do good. But that has been obscured by our distance from government, our cynicism about its ability to produce anything, our distrust of leaders. So women who see all of that, many of them say, I'm just going to do it my own way myself. And in doing so, they deprive us of their ingenuity and leadership, but they also forsake the ability to do good on a grand scale for many people. And I can tell you, if you're interested in the Q&A, many, many pieces of legislation that have changed systems in our state government that have benefited all of us, from environment to education. So DIY is a big reason. Some women make a decision that they will not run for office until they have raised their families. So family is a consideration. So I'm happy to tell you more and more our institutions of government adapt to the women who come with their children. There are at least 2 women members, one a senator and one an assembly member, whose children attend schools with them and live with them in Sacramento and go back and forth with them. That was not true for a long time. Just in the last several years, we've had the first child born to a sitting member of Congress while she was a member of Congress. But these changes have come very slowly in the United States, much quicker in other countries, much less made of them in other countries. And that's a curiosity, I think. So there are a number of reasons women don't run for public office. But I also think that these so-called barriers are happily fewer and fewer. On the other hand, there are huge, huge contributions that women make to improve the institutions and the outcomes in government that don't get enough coverage, that should inspire other women to join them. And it's an interesting thing to me because the research, the scholarly research recently in the last 5 to 8 years on this has been amazingly positive, but again, not something you see in the popular magazines so much. So let me tell you a little bit about these. We have studied since the 1970s the difference women make in legislative bodies. And the research has been remarkably consistent on some fronts, and we've discovered some new things. But there are basically 4 areas where you can detect the difference: the agenda, the procedures, the content, and the outcomes. Women's presence, even below the 30% or almost 1/3 that sociologists say is necessary to change the culture of an institution, at 18, 19, and 20%, we have been able to see the beginnings of those changes in the cultures of government. Women bring that unique perspective, born in their gender difference, that causes them to see public policy issues from a perspective that is our own. And that means that when we are discussing certain issues, we see them from a point of view that is born of our experience, right? It makes perfect sense when you think about it. But the effect that it has in terms of setting an agenda is different. We are more likely to think about things from a perspective of how it affects a family unit or a community. We are more likely to put on the agenda environment, education, children, and families. Not a surprise, but when you consider that that's where we all got our start, it is a bit surprising that that's a difference from how the agendas have been formulated without women. In terms of procedures, there's a great deal of research on how women change the culture of an institution. When women are present in a legislative body, the procedures are more transparent. So women are the ones who say, post the agenda on the internet, open the proceedings to the public, let's let people hear us, let's broadcast or stream, let's open this up. Women are also the people that excluded groups go to in the legislature to get access. So in terms of race and ethnicity, those leaders often look for women members to find access into a hearing or legislation, participate in the development of legislation, or to bring legislative ideas. And while we don't know exactly why that is true, we believe it is true because if women are in such a small percentage in the body, then people have a sense of affinity that if they are also in small numbers or excluded, we women will at least understand that and be open-minded. So we are the ones who tend to be inclusive. We're the ones who require greater outreach to let people know what's happening. We're the ones who provide greater access in. In terms of collaboration, there is quite a bit, and I think we have to be careful about this because I'll tell you a little sidebar. I have been lucky enough for the last 15 years to be involved in an ongoing study of every woman who has run for governor in the United States. And I do this with a team of researchers from across the country for a foundation in Boston. And we did this specifically to understand what are the roadblocks that women face when they run, and what is different about a woman running for executive office than legislative office, and what are those strategies, and how do people clear those hurdles. So we've looked at women running for governor to understand that. One of the very first things we found when we did this research was that the electorate looked differently at women. And they believe that women are more honest. And we called this the virtue advantage, and we first encountered it in 1998. So the virtue advantage was a good thing, right? Women are more honest. People want this transparency and honesty in government. This is terrific that the voters see it this way. This is a great advantage for women. Until we began to notice in subsequent election cycles through the 2000s that opponents of women would see them as on this pedestal, and the first thing that would happen in any big election would be that the opposition would try to knock the woman off her pedestal. They would find some misstatement of fact, some paper filed late, some procedural error, and blow it up so that it would take away from the public the confidence they had that women were more honest. So it has become less of a factor over the 15 years since we first identified it. But it is true and interesting. Even before we discovered this in our research, in Arizona in the mid-1990s, you may remember, some of you, the governor there got into a bit of trouble, was indicted and removed from office. In the subsequent election to his removal from office, the voters of Arizona elected a complete slate of women to statewide offices in Arizona. So for a while, we used this, or we were aware of this sensibility of honesty as a way of, and here's something that was driven into the ground, kind of hackneyed now, a way to clean house or clean up this mess. But there is a sense still, although not as pronounced as when we first discovered it, that women will be transparent and honest, and it is particularly pronounced when it comes to budget and money issues. And there seems to be a perception among voters that women have had to stretch a budget for themselves and other people, that they know how to do that, and that they're pretty direct about what's affordable and what isn't affordable in the sense of a household budget. Now, on the one hand, I think that's a good thing. On another hand, it is troubling always that voters see women leaders and women candidates for office through a lens of their domestic experience. I suspect that this is generational, that over time, as more women are expected and do go directly to the workplace for the vast majority of their lives, that will fade away. But for now, it lingers. That lingers. So we know that women are transparent, that they have a little bit of a benefit of the doubt in terms of honesty, that they are believed to be inclusive in terms of the procedures they set up in a legislature, and that they are more collaborative. Now, this collaborative piece is always a little troubling to me because it seems kind of to grow from a stereotype that I'm not fond of, which is one I'll just call the nice girl stereotype. That we get along, we're happy to help, we're likable, we'll do what you need, we'll help you out. And I don't think that's right. I think it comes from something else. I think it comes from a notion that if people gave us their vote to go do our best for them, then our job is to do our best for them. And there's really nothing else to do but our best work. And I do think that comes from a sense of responsibility, which is something that every legislator has in one measure or other, but I think women bring a slightly different sensibility to that. And let me tell you about a study that corroborates in part that notion. It's a wonderful study, I think it was in 2011-12, done by a researcher at Stanford and one at the University of Chicago, and they dubbed it the Jackie and Jill Robinson effect. And here was their thesis. They said, you know what, it's so hard for women to get to Congress. They've been stuck at under a fifth of the body for so long. These women must be extraordinary. They must be better than their male counterparts. So our thesis is, if we go compare the men in Congress and the women in Congress, we're going to find some measures on which the women outperform the men, regardless of party. So they did that study, and what they found was, to corroborate our notion of productivity or collaboration, women introduce more legislation than their counterparts, on average 26 bills more each, and they get many more co-sponsors for that legislation. But here is the real interesting one. If you are represented by a woman in Congress, and you are, your district gets $49 million a year more because of their industry than districts represented by a man. So that is a fairly recent study that goes to the point of both industry and productivity and collaboration, which says, yes, there is a benefit to having women in elected office. Now, this was a study of women in Congress, but it's an interesting thing. And again, we take these pieces and data points and they all go into a hodgepodge of what is steaming or percolating right now. But that's relatively new and relatively recent. And it's corroborated, interestingly, by studies in the private sector that you may have heard of. Credit Suisse was one of the very first investment banking houses to do research on gender balance on investment committees. And the return on investment made by committees that have at least one woman consistently outpaces investments made by committees of all men. So that was one of the first times we thought, well, that's interesting, and it reflects a little bit what's happening over here in legislatures and in Congress. And I thought that that's one of my favorites, because there isn't that much in the private sector that corroborates gender value, because it's expensive. And it's not always at the top of anyone's agenda in the private sector when return on investment is really the only driving force. So I thought that that was a terrific one to help us with. So we have good information for this culture change that women bring in terms of collaboration and transparency and inclusiveness and productivity. Those are things that we have some data for, and that's useful. It's also true that women change the content of the legislation, and I have a couple to share with you that I think are valuable. There has been a real sea change in the way our government looks at those who do military service and veterans. And it has been the women on the Armed Services Committee who have said, you cannot look at a returning veteran only in terms of what he or she suffers, needs, how they come home. This is a family and community-wide effect, and it must be dealt with that way. And so the women on the Armed Services Committee began to look differently, and you also see our First Lady, Michelle Obama, spending a great deal of her time on military families as a part of what our country owes to the people who do military service, not just them, but the sacrifice that their families make, which is a different, just a slight, ever so slight adjustment, but a world of difference in terms of respect and services and resources at their disposal. And so a very important adjustment to the content of legislation and how it is conceived, because women are there. This has been true across the board. There was I did a lot of work, as Paul referenced. I did a big project between 2009 and 2012 on getting women in the private sector to step forward and run for public office, and trying to, again, push back a little against the current disaffection for government institutions, that they're ineffective, that they're corrupt, that they don't work, that they're slow, and on, because, again, they may not be perfect, but their ability to change systems and lives is just extraordinarily bigger than anything else we have. And so we need good people there to make that change. And one of the studies we did had to do with welfare reform. I think this was in the state of Iowa. There was one woman on the Ways and Means Committee who was working on welfare reform and how that would look and how it would get funded. And there, a subcommittee, mostly of men, I think it was actually all male, had come up with a system of incentives for getting people, mostly unmarried women, out and back into the workforce. But two significant pieces, she thought, were not there. One was childcare, and the other was transportation. And it's very difficult, as you know, for anyone to get to and from work. One, if they're the primary caregiver to a child, and two, if they have no way to get there and to get home. But we don't think sometimes in our institutional way of thinking about the most simple, concrete things. And this woman was able to reframe that in her committee so that they actually came up with something that might work. But absent her presence and her thinking about how would this affect real people in these circumstances, we would have had, I think, probably not much success there. How do women's presence affect outcomes? This is probably my most hopeful and the happiest set of circumstances, and that is to look at the 20 women who currently sit in the United States Senate. There are 16 Democratic women and 4 Republican women. They are just enough to demand some attention and just enough to be able to sway some votes. And so they have a very interesting Senate culture, which is that they meet and have dinner together, usually once a month, all of them, that they don't speak ill of each other in public, that they try to collaborate where they can to move the agenda along, and they seek each other out for help with the other team's reservations with their agenda. So, for example, if you think about Susan Collins, the Republican from Maine, who reached out to the women in the caucus and on the budget, when we were at the budget impasse, and said, I'll be an ambassador to my side, you be an ambassador to your side, let's get this done. And she and the junior senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, did really good work to get over the budget impasse. That's a way they work together. Interestingly, we have a little bit of research, a wonderful organization called Rachel's Network, which is a group of women, progressive women philanthropists who have a high interest in the environment, did a study looking at Democrats, Republicans, men, women in the United States Congress, and found that women of both parties much more likely to cross over to pass environmental protection legislation. Maybe not a surprise, but good to have the research. It's also true that we could not have passed the Violence Against Women Act without the active participation of all of the women in the United States Senate. It was stuck for a while, and they got it unstuck and out. And that was true, oddly, of a bill that sort of comes as a curveball, because it's not really right there at the heart of what you might think of women's interests. And that was Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow's leadership on the Farm Bill, which was a hard one to move along as well, where she managed that and brought it along. So it's not just the content of legislation, although we have a lot to offer there. In terms of the outcomes, our numbers do change the outcomes and whether some legislation lives or dies. And that becomes a very, very important thing if you're a counter, and I am a counter. I don't want to wait 500 years for gender parity in these institutions. I think that would be devastating for our country. I look at this through patriotic eyes because I look around the world, and I want to recommend something to all of you if you haven't had the pleasure. We're all very lucky now in that there's almost no kind of entertainment that you can't find on your computer or your 500 television channels. But a lot of some of the best work being done is being done outside of our country. And if you were intrigued, as it was hard not to be, by House of Cards, I would say first that the original version of House of Cards done by the Brits is really quite terrific, and I recommend it to you. But the best political drama I have ever seen serialized in the country is a piece done by the Danes called Borgen. And it is the story of the first Danish woman prime minister, and it is brilliant. And it goes to not just the institutional changes that I've talked about, or the influences or the biases of the voters, but it goes to what it is for a woman to have the same kind of power that we traditionally see men have, and how she manages that in a way that does great justice and honor to her gender. So I want to stop there and say to you, there's a great deal more I'm happy to share with you, but I don't think that our country can get where it needs to go or be a leader, even economically, and we sit in this great bubble of economic prosperity and the engine of much of the new that is created in world markets. But we can't get there on one gender. It has to be something that we do together, because our cultural backwardness will begin to mark us as backward. And we are perilously close to being backward if we don't find ways to move ahead together. So thank you.
You spoke of what holds women in America back from running for office. Why do the same things not hold women in other countries back?
Well, there are layers of differences that we can talk about. So let me tell you about the first. In a number of newly created democracies or emerging democracies, in Africa, for example, their constitutions require a percentage of women to participate in their national legislature. So part of it is this just number that is set. In many Western democracies who are under a parliamentarian system, not a parliamentarian system, is that right? Someone will help me with this, but where you have parties who put forward slates of candidates, then in those systems, the parties determine the percentage of women who will be nominated. We do neither of those things. We neither have a constitutional requirement. We couldn't even pass an equal rights amendment here. So neither party has been bold enough to say, we will nominate and spend half our treasury on representatives of half the population. So we don't have that either. So we're at a deficit in part because of those structural differences. Other countries, New Zealand is a good one, they also use a system of ranked choice voting or preferential voting. That has been found to invite more women in. But I will tell you two glimmers of interest here in the United States. I believe in Maine and in Arizona, they both have campaign finance reform laws that favor many small donations and I believe prohibit larger donations. And in those two states, since they have adopted that form of campaign finance reform, their legislatures are both more gender balanced and more diverse. So we are experimenting in a very little way, small effects, but nonetheless experimenting with that. Now, I think your question was, why doesn't it keep men from running? Is that, no? Okay. So does that answer your question? Okay. Sure.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm glad you mentioned Borgen because I think it is one of the most important things that Western leadership should see all over the world.
Agree.
It's about a woman prime minister who has courage, she takes risks, she doesn't want to be corrupt, and I think additionally people don't go into politics because they see it here as so full of corruption. Would you agree with that?
That it's full of corruption? I would not.
Okay. And the second thing I want to mention is that in Scandinavia, not just Denmark, but Finland, Sweden, Norway, the bottom line in their policies for education and political involvement is equity. They start with equity. So that means you pull the bottom up, not start where there's inequality already. I tell my students the difference between equality and equity is you give every kindergartner a banana in the morning, not knowing whether they've had breakfast or not. But with equity, you give the kids who haven't had breakfast a banana first. That's pulling kids up from the bottom. Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a little asthma. You have to be realistic. In other countries, families, from the time they're little, work together. They have a family context that we don't have. And we have a lot of chauvinism. Both men and women can be chauvinistic in this country. You can't just go flying out of your house with 2 to 3 kids and become a congresswoman unless you've got the right circumstances, the right child care, and all of that intact. So my point is, we have to work, like you said, in the European countries, they work together from the time it's more group-oriented in the family. And here, it's more chauvinistic, and it's harder, and it comes from not getting enough help, and also, if you have a special needs child, they need you. Nobody wants to think about things like that, but they need you their whole life. And my question is, how do we integrate that more in this country? Because there's a lot of women that wouldn't think of leaving their family. Because, for one reason, they don't have the help. They don't know their neighbors. They don't have cousins left. You know, they're kind of isolated in this situation. So I think we have to rectify that first.
I think we did a better job than maybe we've did a better job on some of those scores than maybe we've done in telling people about them. The only Democratic governor in the United States is a woman named Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. She has a disabled child. That has been a major motivation in her political career. She served in the state Senate. She was unelected, I believe, by the Tea Party. She came back to run and was elected governor. She is highly motivated and has other children, has borne that. That has been part of what motivated her. Right here in California, we have elected 2 women to Congress who have been on the welfare rolls as welfare moms. One from Marin County and the other from Los Angeles. Very different circumstances, very different backgrounds. But the women who choose to make this statement that they believe that government is a source and of solutions, and that they have an experience that is absent and could be helpful in finding those solutions, that's one of the most powerful arguments people can make, men or women, for serving. So I would say, are we perfect? No. But is there evidence to say extraordinary things can happen? There's no question. The question really is, can we make this ordinary? Can people of all circumstances find a way in to public service? I have been close to public service for a long time. I have worked in this for 30 years. I have managed campaigns for many different kinds of people, and my husband is a public servant. And so, one, I can tell you, most of the people there, they're not corrupt. People make huge sacrifices to do this kind of work. Are they all good? No, but neither are the ones you work with every day. It's a hodgepodge of human beings who bring all different kinds of things. It's not a big enough variety of a big enough range of experience to get us where we need to go. And that's why I advocate for women. But I do think that there are bright spots like Governor Hassan and some of the other women who encompass the experiences you're talking about and who show that it can happen. We just need to happen in greater numbers and with greater ease and without the burden of raising gazillions of dollars.
We have various degrees. Every child is an individual, and sometimes that responsibility carries along.
Yes.
So how are you going to determine that? Can they work in the home? Can you work in the home?
Well, you go back and, depending on what office you have, we tried to, I'll give you another good example. We tried to recruit a number of women from county boards of supervisors to serve in the legislature, and a big impediment for many of them, if they had children still in school, was serving on a county board of supervisors almost always allows you to live at home. Going to commute to Sacramento means you have to spend part of the week, part of your year in Sacramento. And that's a fact of life, but if you are intent on a career in public service, it gives you a pathway that is consistent with the growth of your family. So there is a path.
Yes, I've been an advocate of women running for office for a long time. Elizabeth Warren is my dream candidate, and I think in 2008 the Democratic Party made a mistake by passing up a very qualified woman for an unqualified man. And but there are more women than men in this country, and more men vote for men than women vote for women. And I think culturally that women don't believe in women, and somehow we have to change that, you know. And I don't know if it takes, you know, a role model, maybe a really good movie with a really strong female character, you know, would help change that. But, power isn't given, power is taken, and women could just take it, and they don't, And I'm wondering what your thoughts are regarding, getting women to vote for women and having women see themselves differently, because that would make the difference in the elections.
Thank you.
Give me that mic.
Yeah, I think you go to a nub of a very hard problem, but I smile because in a culture where the new head of Microsoft can tell you not to go and ask for a raise, it's really a hard thing to imagine that the systems are set up to support women thinking they should be president. So there are, and I love the point that you raised, because it goes right to the nub of the issue, that as a culture, men and women, there is an aspect of gender and advancement, or an aspect of our appreciation of gender difference, that tells us that women are lesser, that they are lesser. And that is not confined to men thinking that. That is a part of the makeup of all women who grew up here as well. So that is something that you've identified that I think is present, is less present than it was, kind of like that notion of virtue advantage, that you get a little bit more reality, and both of those things come into alignment. There are good women and bad women, and there are very talented women who should be leading our country. I would submit to you, as much as I'm a fan of the senator from Massachusetts, let's not make the same mistake twice on the unprepared part. So it seems to me that one of the things that we have to do is, as women, we need, in order to get there quicker, we need to just simply expand our acceptance. I have often thought, and I do believe, that just a wider band of openness to what leadership is will enable more women with leadership styles to advance. We inevitably go through a period of time where the incoming group adopts the behaviors of the dominant group. And I always laugh at this, because I remember when Senator Feinstein was mayor in San Francisco and she wore suits with ties. Do you remember that? And I thought, what a perfect physical manifestation of this notion that you've got to be sort of a version of the power that's there. And I think one of the reasons that I recommend Borgen, and the woman in the back obviously appreciates this, is because this is the first time I've ever seen portrayed in art a woman who was herself as a woman, not adaptive of the dominant norm of what power looks like, who was exceedingly powerful and perhaps even more powerful than what that norm looks like. And that is what it will take. It will take a redefinition of power so that a woman doesn't have to be less and less of a woman to be the most powerful person in the room. And that's an evolution that we could speed up. I think you are right to recognize that art has a place to play in what that looks like, but then we have to translate it and be more willing to take risks to find those nuances and differences and use them. So I wish I could tell you it was happening faster. Here's one observation that I think is very hopeful. The generation behind ours, women who are coming into the workforce and into leadership today, who are in their 30s and 40s, those women, many of them played team sports as a function of their growing up. So they were in soccer leagues as 6-year-olds. They were on the basketball team. They played competitive lacrosse in college. Those women know what it is to go out every week, put your heart out on the field, and lose, and come back and play again and lose, and come back and play again and win one. That's a very different experience than women of my generation, who did not have a sense of risk, loss, reward in personal endeavor, in aspiration. And I think it's making a huge difference. And I want to say, here's what's delicious about that. The woman who wrote that Title IX that enabled and required equal resources for women to have that experience, Patsy Mink, now gone, was one of the vanguard of women in Congress. And what she started is having an extraordinary effect on a generation of women who are pretty bold and willing to risk a lot. And that's great. That's encouraging in terms of what you're asking.
Well, I have 2 points.
Yes.
The first one is I think that women tend to think more in terms of one human family, the world's children, resolving conflicts through collaboration. Men tend to think in terms of adversarial things. So I think it's the idea that the Earth is our planetary home. That's more of a feminine perspective. I think it's really important considering the state of the world in terms of nuclear weapons and climate change. The other thing is that I read something about why women and men want to get into Congress. The women have a tendency to want to get in Congress to get something done.
Right.
The men tend to want to get in because they want status.
Well, that's why I work right now to recruit women. And you've all said partial things that go to this, but men will self-nominate. They will say, I'd like to be a senator. That sounds good. Women, if they are asked, if they are encouraged, if someone they have regard for makes a recommendation that they think about that, that's a huge nudge for a woman. But most women, for whatever reason, they don't go to the prom by themselves. Again, I think that that's a cultural norm for a generation that is changing. But I also want to caution you, while I think there are things in our nature, in terms of our genders, that may be more dominant for one or the other, and I look to you guys as the keepers of this, guys, I look to you all as keepers of this, which is that our gender differences, if you span sort of both genders, the qualities, it is a rare thing that something is so innate. There are some, and this is not my area. So I would caution you, because when you started to talk, I thought immediately of some of our local women who have run for high office. And I don't know that our experiences, if you fought your way to the head of a major American corporation, I do not know that you would hold the perspective that you described, because that may have been distilled out of you as you rose in power in the corporate world. So I think we want to be careful about what we know or think we know about what gender embodies, and always be questioning. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm asking you to be very careful in applying that to women or men who run for office, and to try to understand who this person is, because I think we are all different.
I think we put a number of barriers between women who would like to do something and what women can actually do. And I just want to talk about one example. 40 years ago, when my kids went to school, I was totally in favor of public schools until I went and looked at their schedule. I realized I had a responsible position in corporate America, and I couldn't possibly send my kids to public school and still hold my job. So I sent my kids to private school. Now here it is, 40 years later, and my daughter is in the same fix. If she didn't have me, she would be sending her son to private school, because no one has enough respect in the school system to realize that women work. They can't be there at some random time. Every month there are changes in the schedule. So you can't possibly plan ahead and say, okay, I'll meet you every Wednesday for lunch. You can't do that if your children are in public school. You're destroying the possibility of women having responsible jobs and having children at the same time. And it's not necessary because private schools don't do that. And I'd like to understand, how can we fix the public school system so that they have the same respect for women that they have respect for men, who they don't treat this way?
So, well, if you're a stay-at-home dad, or if you're a single dad, they do. They do. So let's try to be aware that we all live different lives. But first and foremost, what I would say to you, it's a part of the catch-22 of the number of few women in leadership. In many other countries, we are having a discussion in education, and I'm by no means an expert in education, but we are having a discussion, and it comes up periodically, of a longer school day, just not having to do with your schedule or anyone else's schedule, just is that what we should be doing for kids? And I think that if there were more women in these institutions who make the laws about what school looks like, then you could expect to have at least a discussion of what this does to a working family where both parents work, or the responsible parent works, or the one parent works, or whatever. What you have now is, unfortunately, 3 generations of Ozzie and Harriet removed, but not far enough different to have that conversation, have the votes or the perspective to have a serious hearing in the legislature. So, you know, it seems to me, school boards, we have a lot of authority under local control. How much? I don't know. But I do believe that this is inevitable. It's certainly happening in other countries, that they structure the school day differently, the school year differently. There's no reason why we can't. But there seems not to be the will to make or demand these kinds of changes in a way that gets responded to. And I want to take you back to something that I believe more and more with every passing year. Because the interests of moms who work, or moms and dads who work, who would like to have the predictability, perhaps the coverage of a long day, perhaps the assistance of universal child care, some kind of support. And to go back to your question, you talk about family. We have very few institutions in this country that are designed to enhance family life, time, togetherness. We do everything we can to demand, we are a culture devoted to the workplace. And that is a cultural shift and a legal shift and a legislative shift that I think a lot of people are asking for, to both of your points. And it's within our ability to get it, if only the moneyed interests who take up all of the oxygen in the legislative space were tamped down a bit. Perhaps we could pay attention to some of these things.
Mary, in your efforts to recruit women for office, what was the most persuasive argument that you were able to make successfully?
I think the argument that is most persuasive to people is one they don't know. Most people have no idea how much good you can do. They have no idea that one person coming to the legislature with the goal of getting all 4-year-olds into a universal kindergarten or preschool, that the difference that makes in the lives of those children, in the lives of their families, it's extraordinary. And one person can go and work on that for, what it means, what it meant for us to say we will have every 3rd grader will be reading at grade level at 3rd grade, and to say that's a goal for all of us and an important thing, that's a huge difference in those children's lives. So, you know, that's true for our medical investment. You know, we made a huge investment in our state in stem cell research when other people were going in a different direction. That was a policy that we voted for as a matter of, I think we did it as a ballot initiative. And the difference that will make for generations, for people to come. We are so disaffected, so off-put by the government and the politicians, and yet individually, these are human beings trying hard to do good work. But we have accepted that this is an unproductive, unworthy, corrupt, whatever. It simply isn't true. And so we have to make the case, those of us who see it up close and see the good things that can come from it, you have to go back to people and say, would you run if you knew that you could accomplish this? And most people who have an interest or the bug or feel like, yes, they'd like to try that, they get it. They get it. But we really have to make the case these days that these are productive institutions producing better circumstances for better quality lives.
I have a question, and that is, what is anything being done as far as childhood education to really counteract the attitude that women are not leaders, or cannot, or aren't necessarily thought of as leaders? I mean, I think that a lot more needs to be done to change the whole attitude of men and women that, hey, this is what we can strive for.
I think what I know about this kind of big vision shift in change is that a lot of little things have to happen, and then one thing will happen that will shift how we think. And let me tell you what I'm thinking of in particular. In 1991, I was running the mayor's race in San Francisco, and it was October, sometime between August and October, I think. And we had to stop phone banking. We had to stop calling people's houses. No one would answer the phone because everyone was riveted on the Senate hearings to confirm now Justice Thomas. And a lot had been said and done about the importance of equality and women participating, and we thought from the 1970s, those of us who were active then, we thought we have really opened things up and there will be a lot of change to come. But it took watching one dignified, purposeful woman, unwavering, face down the power of an all-male Senate Judiciary Committee with calm and determination for the country to say, whoa, something is way off here. And it was in that next election in 1992 that 24 new women were elected to the House of Representatives, the largest cohort of women to increase in any election ever, before or since. So sometimes what you have to do are the small things to be ready for a moment that galvanizes us all to say, we have to do differently. And that's what we did then, and we made a big step forward. Unfortunately, we haven't capitalized on that step forward, and we've actually flatlined the last decade. So that's why I'm talking to you this morning about this very important issue.
I'm going to step in here just for a second and just ask if you see, I watch a number of other issues going on, like there's a lot of stuff going on with racism, the Ferguson incident, I don't know if you know of Gamergate, where the young woman doing video games had to cancel a talk at University of Utah because they couldn't be sure that
she would be safe.
Yeah, someone wouldn't come in and create a larger massacre than the largest one in all of our schools. I think that's what it was. But all the social issues that are kind of going through transformation at this point, including the non-binary gender, and it goes on. I wonder this is just it's a piece of a bigger picture, maybe. I wonder how you see it. How we look at women in general, how we see their power as what was suggested here, how we might look at women in power given all these other social issues that are also going on. Like maybe there's something more major than each one individually going on at the moment. Or you can pass if you want.
No, I understand the question. I think there are a couple of different sectors here that are sort of working through women's leadership. I do not know very much about the world of games, but what I do know that is different in some ways from public policy and the government arena is there are places where it appears to be that violence is okay. It's okay on the football field. It's okay in these games. It's okay in there seem to be some places, and that's a place where you can just expect that there will be tension around women's leadership, I think. And I don't know why, that's not my area of expertise, but I do know that I think of those as hot spots. They're not places where we're even talking about leadership. We're just talking about a non-hostile environment. So that's what I know about that. What I think, though, is that the fewer women, and let me make one more case for why women in government is so important. Because government sets the standard for what other institutions should look like. And if that is what happened in the Anita Hill example that I gave you, we looked at that. That is our highest government. That is what it looked like. And it did not look like our country or our aspirations for our country. And so we set about changing it. And it is not lost on all of us that there are now 20 women in the Senate. Not 50, but 20, better. I think there were 3 at the time. So, but it's important to understand, I think, that if you are going to government to petition, whether you're a nonprofit or a citizens organization or a major corporation or an association for corporations in our country, and you go to see a senator, you go to see Barbara Boxer, you don't go with 6 white men. That would convey that you don't understand, right? Mm-hmm. So it matters who is powerful. It matters for the operation of the rest of the society. And we haven't done enough in government, so we shouldn't be surprised that there are these outliers where women are inhospitably treated.
Okay, looks like we have time for one more question, and we have one more announcement, so if you can make a quick comment. And
the Constitution says everybody should be equal. Until we get respect and reverence for the feminine and men grow up, we're not going to get very far. You heard me. When they stop raising their hand when you're talking and all those kind of gestures they do in their everyday life, we're going to get a lot further. You need to grow up.
So we're going to do one announcement, and then we may actually have time for one more question. So think if you have a question to raise your hand.
Thanks, Laura. Sorry, I just have a quick announcement from Professor Roberta Ahlquist, who couldn't stay till the end today, and she asked me to announce that the United Nations Association Film Festival will be going on from today through next Sunday at Stanford and in Palo Alto and East Palo Alto. And if you want to find out what they're going to be showing, I have the booklet here. I'll leave on the table here. Or you can go to their website, which is unaff.org.
Did you have a question? All right. One last question, I think.
How does one learn about opportunities to participate in government or in political parties?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking. In most counties, there are county central committees for each party, and in many counties for some of the minor liberal and minor conservative parties. So there's ample opportunity to both learn about the parties Their online resources are usually quite good, so you can start there. They're called county central committees, and it is the unit of operation that I would recommend that you first come into as an activist, because I think people who understand the grassroots of their communities work at a great advantage as they advance. People who come into politics at a high level, and there are many who lateral in from other both professions and career tracks, I think that they don't always appreciate what happens on the most basic level of party organization. So I recommend starting there. Thank you all very much. Fun to be with you.
Thank you, Mary.